Chapter 39. How am I still alive? The enormous shape screeched in a cacophony of voices as it dragged its massive bulk out of the cave and into the light. Nearing 10 meters in height, a misshapen mountain of flesh dragged its body forward with its many misshapen limbs. The many heads grafted onto its body, some blind and some not, snapped and sniffed in all directions in an attempt to find something worth eating. Various tubes and mechanical bits were surgically grafted into the mutated flesh, and unknown fluids shining with the sickening glow of warpstone were being pumped continuously into its body. Primitive wheels reinforced with crude iron rims helped it move much faster than possible for something of that size. The heavy bolter rounds impacted and blew small chunks of flesh off of it, but almost as fast as the wounds were inflicted, new flesh grew out to close them. Fire at will. Unload on the mutant with everything you have. Engineers, leave the work and prepare to repel the small mutants. This was bad. This was really bad, and I shouted my orders without trying to conceal the panic. It would help them realize that this was not just the whim of a strange rogue traitor. The area lit up with the light of 200 lost pistols firing in unison with the heavy bolters, and the damage slowly started building on the abomination approaching us. It was not enough. At this point, it would reach us before we could do enough damage to it. It was already within a few hundred meters of our position, and the damage only made it angrier and faster. I sensed more than saw the panic spreading among the troopers. Their fire rate increased while their accuracy fell, and the battle banter was replaced with sharp-tongued directions instead. A literal hailstorm of stubber rounds flew through a hole in our ranks, with almost unholy amounts of fire pouring forward. A glance over my shoulder revealed Archimedes, the tech priest, firing all 4 of his macro stubbers with astonishing precision. I had no idea when he arrived, but I was thankful he was here. A missile flew overhead and connected cleanly with the center of the abomination, the explosion and subsequent shower of gore stopping it dead in its track. It wasn't enough. With a shriek of pain that shook the walls and made the dust rain from the cave ceiling, it threw itself forward, the unholy concoctions flowing into its body already knitting together the damaged tissue and growing new flesh. Keep firing. Use everything you have. I screamed in near panic, fumbling for an extra charge pack in my pocket. With my free hand, I started fiddling with the settings on it, trying to overcharge it to the point where it became unstable. It took a few seconds, during which the abomination closed to just outside of throwing distance. A sharp beep told me I had succeeded, and I threw the charge pack with all my might. It impacted the advancing mutant before falling on the ground and getting covered by the wheeled contraption that helped it move before the charge pack exploded. More powerful than a regular grenade, but not as powerful as an overheating plasma weapon, it was enough to ruin the wooden wheels and grind the advance of the abomination to a crawl. With my offhand being free once more, I drew my falchion while I kept firing and prepared myself for the melee that was still approaching. "My lord, please step aside." A voice rang out behind me, and almost by instinct I did as asked. A white-hot beam of psychic energy blazed past me, followed by a scream imbued with psychic energy, both colliding with the beast. The psychic shriek made it impossible for it to use its limbs to absorb the molten beam, as it wreaked havoc on the already splintered mind of the abomination, and the beam cut cleanly through the unarmored flesh. Despite the unprecedented amount of firepower and psychic powers being leveled against it, it still advanced, whatever thoughts remained inside of it having been reduced to a single instinct: to crush, kill, and devour whatever it could get its limbs on. The multitude of heads cried out in pain and anguish, snapping ferociously in the air in the hopes of catching a random opponent in their jaws, and with a mighty effort it reared high above our loose formation before crashing down and crushing a dozen troops under its bulk, limbs thrashing and mouths ripping at the already dead men and women. The proximity did have a single upside. Every trooper that had won fired their shot cannons with devastating effect, turning almost the entire front of the abomination into little more than ground meat. With another unholy screech, it shuddered and fell over, its body crashing audibly to the ground. People started cheering and celebrating, but I was not so quick to relax. I was waiting for the thing to burst and a small army of large rats to emerge. When it didn't happen, I made a choice. Don't stop attacking. It's not finished. I barked, and the confused soldiers looked at me as I lunged forward and slashed at the body with my falchion. The wound I inflicted started bleeding profusely, but it also started knitting itself back together. Before I could launch another attack, and before the troops around me could react to what I was doing, the abomination began moving again. It started dragging itself back to an upright position, slowly at first, but quickly regaining motor control. By the Emperor, kill it again! I screamed as I started slashing wildly into its still heavily wounded body, desperate to inflict as much tissue damage as possible in an attempt to slow its return to life. Several troops close to me followed my example, abandoning ranged weapons in favor of stabbing and cutting at the beast. Little did it help. With a mighty heave, the Helped abomination once more reared high above us and screeched its fury and hatred into the air. With its mobility restored, my attacks quickly turned into a frantic defense, trying to block or parry the raking claws and gleaming teeth that could now reach me. I spun, ducked, fired my lost pistol with my offhand, and blocked as many of the attacks as I could manage. The sounds of the troops around me were deafened. Their weapons' fire and shouting became insignificant in the face of the task before me. I was fighting for dear life, every move made with a singular purpose: survive. I was not fast enough nor strong enough to stop every attack, but so far my carapace armor was absorbing what my skill and ability could not stop. But for how long? My movements were a blur of speed, more instinct than thought, but I could feel my energy burning fast. I could not keep this up for long, and the towering mutant in front of me had warp-infused Skaven potions and concoctions being pumped into it every moment of its life. The mere fact that I was still standing was a testament to the power of mankind when backed into a corner. Or more likely, a testament to the power of the system boosting my natural ability. A searing pain shot through my left arm, and with a twist of my blade, I cut off the blind and misshapen head that had clamped its teeth down on my wrist. Even after being cut off, it still hung on to my arm. Its jaws locked when I cut it off the body. Now robbed of my lost pistol, my defense became frantic, driven purely by the instinct, the very need to survive, and I started stumbling backward, the abomination pressing forward with the taste of my blood still fresh on its lips. Fire! A voice boomed almost as loud as the initial roar of the abomination that shook the cave ceiling, and I heard synchronized bolter fire being unleashed upon the abomination. I could feel the whoosh of the bolts as they passed me, and every time one of them detonated, the small explosion sent out a shockwave that felt like a small punch to the face. But it gave me the pause I needed to create distance between me and the horror that had wounded me. With distance, the sounds of the rest of the battlefield came back to me, and I realized that the number of weapons fired far exceeded the number of troops I had brought with me. Allowing myself a short moment to sense the battlefield, I got the feeling that thousands of troops were pouring forth from our established defenses, but I could only hear bolters and the occasional flamer. A hand grabbed my shoulder and pulled me backward. A melta-gun fired next to me, burning a deep hole in the abomination, who was now screeching in pain and anguish as bolter fire slowly reduced it to bloody chunks. The wave of rats that exploded out of its body, the last dirty trick of something so unholy, never left the carcass as bolter round explosions ripped them apart. Extra ecclesiam, nulla salus. Extra laborum, nulla peritus. Extra bellum, nulla victoria. Extra imperatorum, nihil. The same powerful voice that called on the bolters to fire was now reciting the prayer of Dusthaven. Purify the remains in holy fire. Outside the church, no stone. Outside work, no purity. Outside war, no victory. Outside the Emperor, nothing. I mumbled in low Gothic as I was dragged backward, the meltagun in the person's hand firing mercilessly into the once more collapsing abomination. You are almost as skillful as you are reckless. Engaging in melee with a beast like that is something that should be reserved for the Astartes. I do not know what manner of luck shielded you until we could reach the front line, but a man of lesser station would have been left to suffer the defeat you were staring down. The stranger was admonishing me while still dragging me along, back behind the line of troops and combat engineers I had brought forward, and I noticed they had been reinforced. Sisters of Battle in their powered armor had joined the ranks and were dealing quick death with their bolters and flammers, and the Helped Abomination was now little more than a burning pile of corrupted flesh and broken crude machinery. I managed a good look at the person dragging me, and even if he had not been wearing the classical witch hunter hat, the large book carrying the mark of the Inquisition that was chained to his hip, the power sword next to it, and the melt-a-gun in his hand told their own story. Fight not for glory, but for duty alone, for only in death does duty end. I recited the Book of the Ordinator, both to rebuke his words, but also to redeem myself of my very reckless idea of trying to fight in melee. With the fire of his wrath, we exist and come far afield to strange worlds to hunt the hunter. He responded and let go of me, letting me fall to the floor. The Skaven had been gathering while the Helped Abomination made its attack, but seeing it fall made them scatter back into the darkness, no doubt to find someone and make them report the failure. Whoever delivered that message would undoubtedly experience just how creative a Skaven Grey Seer could get in their punishments. But knowingly putting a great asset of the Emperor in great danger could be seen as the first step down the road of heresy. His tone was harsh and his eyes hard. The fanatical zeal and intense scrutiny in the look he gave me hinted that he was bordering on the brink of insanity, only kept in check by his oath to his duties and his absolute faith that he was doing the Emperor's work. Trust the God Emperor, but trust your blade too. I snapped back as I got to my feet, only now becoming aware of the wounds I had received during my fight with the abomination. Numerous lacerations and cuts adorned my body, dragging long and deep grooves into my carapace armor. I had insistent notifications blinking annoyingly in the corner of my vision, but now was not the time. Words from the vigilant Atellus Thrax. Perhaps you are not lost yet, Lord Captain. Take steps to ensure your personal safety in the future. For now, I must insist that you lead me to the wretched artifact you sent word about, after which we will discuss your fate. The witch hunter said in a formal tone that left no room for discussion. But discuss I would. I was a rogue trader, damn it. I will more than happily hand off that foul and unholy thing to someone more competent in dealing with such matters. But as for my fate, I would say it is already decided. As any good Imperial would do, I alerted the proper authorities upon discovery of the artifact, had it placed in a secure location, and put it under the protection of sanctioned psychers from my flagship to suppress any foul influence that might spread from a thing of such danger, as well as my personal retinue of Ogrins. Their simple minds and loyal demeanors will shield them from negative influence. And while I waited, I have been waging righteous war in the name of the Emperor to rid this world of corruption and mutation. Outnumbered, we have picked a fight with an inferior enemy that nonetheless has the potential to drown us in numbers. I have faced down a Chaos Champion and emerged victorious. I have killed one of the mutant psychers, wrecked their unholy warp mechanism, and kept more troops alive to keep fighting in the name of the Imperium than most other commanders with 200 years of command experience would be able to. I have rooted out heresy in the top of this station's leadership and had the role of planetary governor, with all the responsibilities and troubles that come with it, forced unto me until a suitable replacement can be found, leaving my duties to the Golden Throne to be neglected. Now you tell me, witch hunter, if those are the actions of someone who is not loyal to the Imperium and the God Emperor. By the throne, you see me covered in the wounds I acquired fighting the enemies of mankind. We had been walking back as I spoke, the stone-faced Inquisitor narrowing his eyes more and more as I spoke, stopping and turning to face me at the end of the tirade. All of those exploits you lay claim to will be easy enough to verify. Considering your recent promotion to your current station, you will of course forgive my skepticism. Then again, new rogue traders are not chosen without scrutiny. In any case, my agents are questioning your soldiers at the camp at this moment. I have already been informed of an unusual eagerness to speak about your character. I find that curious, and I must admit that I am experiencing something truly rare in my dealings with you, even before we have interacted. I am feeling a sense of anticipation, and for that, I will extend my gratitude. I thought such things lost me over a century ago. He nodded to me as we casually strolled back toward the tunnel leading to the cave with our base in it. When we passed the established defenses that had kept us safe so far, I called out to the arch-militant, currently overseeing the advance of the Inquisitor's troops from his vantage point of the hastily constructed and heavily fortified defensive works. Move the troops forward, more engineers to work, and at least 8,000 to hold to the area around them until the bunker is complete. At once, Lord Captain, he called back while forming the Aquila and bowing slightly. For a moment, I wondered what the sudden show of respect was for, but then I thought about it. I had shown myself willing to listen to those more experienced despite my infinitely higher status. I was not afraid of getting stuck alongside the grunts when things got rough, and I strove hard to keep the peace among the differing factions both in and outside my flagship, which allowed for better overall function, and I tried to preserve the life of the common soldier. That last part was especially important to a man like the arch-militant, as it gave him access to a larger, growing pool of veterans to use. What most of them failed to understand, which I had in the back of my mind at any given moment I had to resort to force, was that I needed to get into the habit of preserving troops. Out among the edges of unexplored Imperial space, I would have little to no chance to reinforce at will, so I would have to make do with what I had, which meant keeping as many of the poor souls alive as was humanly possible. We had been walking in silence, the Inquisitor and I, and lost as I was in my thoughts, I did not notice we had made it back to camp. And for once I was immensely happy to see the confessor moving toward us as fast as possible while retaining his dignity. Lord Captain, he began with a deep bow. The preparations have been completed and the funeral rites are ready to commence at your pleasure. It was my hope you would join the men in prayer. They have grown fond of your attention to the common imperial citizen. Funeral rites? I would like to know more, confessor, he demanded. Since when does the common soldier deserve the luxury of a public funeral? Since they gave their lives in penance for earlier transgressions, protecting our Lord Captain during his successful raid to destroy a foul warp mechanism. They have fulfilled their task and made it to duty's end. The confessor snapped back. He was not outside the influence of the Inquisitor, but the headache of troubles it would cause with the ecclesiarchy was enough to put him in a safe zone, and they glared at each other, united in purpose but forever divided in approach. Well, I guess that's one claim verified. The Inquisitor finally said, not only will I attend, but I wish to say a soldier's prayer once your official rites have been completed. This will happen, Inquisitor, but afterward, I will continue to cooperate to the fullest extent. But these men followed me into battle, and as their commander, I will see to it that they receive the honor they have earned in death. This is not up for debate, no matter the Inquisition's wants and desires. I told him, and the look he gave me told me exactly how little he appreciated my sentiment, but I enjoyed quite a bit of protection as a rogue trader, and he could do nothing to prevent it. If you must. He finally relented, but I noticed his hand twitching toward the bolter on his hip. Inquisitor, need I remind you that we work for the same masters? I added, gesturing to the symbols on my, now badly damaged, carapace armor, and his face softened slightly, but the hard and slightly crazed look in his eyes stayed. At least his hand stopped twitching. The rest of our walk passed in silence as we approached the funeral pyre that had been built for the purpose. The soldiers and ogrins that had given their lives had been placed there, and I knew I had to address the ogrins as well. This was not their way of burial, and as simple-minded as they were, they still had strong wills when it came to their few rites and rituals. One of the confessor's priests was holding a small speech about the fallen soldiers, but when I made it to the raised platform, he respectfully finished and made way for me to take a stand. I looked over the gathered soldiers, their eyes staring back at me with a mix of elation and sadness. I didn't blame them. Soldiers, I began and took a deep breath before I continued. As we say our goodbyes to the fallen, we must not forget our purpose for being here. As we send these brave souls to the loving embrace of our Emperor, allow me a moment to say a prayer for the repentant fallen. I took another deep breath and put on a solemn face before I started reciting the prayer of the fallen. We stand the last watch for our fellow guardsman, who has fallen in his service. Holy God Emperor, we beg of thee, take these guardsmen who has lived and died righteously in fear and love of thee, to thy right hand where they may bask forever in thy glory. We honor them and all who fall in thy service, and pray for thy mercy for ourselves. We salute our brothers and sisters in arms and see them shine in glory, beckoning us ahead on the path of duty, to where he awaits us. Their duty is done. Ave Imperator. All the gathered soldiers repeated, Ave Imperator. and made ready to return to their duties, but I held up a hand, signaling that I was not done. I am not finished. While the prayer over the dead is all well and good, these brave guardsmen died while repenting their past transgressions. I desire that they reach the Emperor's embrace with a clear conscience. The confusion spread on the faces of the gathered soldiers, except for a small handful. Those were the survivors of the group I had brought with me to destroy the mechanism holding the screaming bell. Another deep breath, and a moment of silence before I began another prayer. We live only at his sufferance. To whom can we reach for guidance? Only to you, O Emperor, who are justly angry at our failings. Shut not your ears to our prayers, but spare us. Turn not your gaze from our suffering, but forgive us. Where our human failings cause us to fall short of our duty, grant thy strength to lead us to your light. People of the Creed, of the Imperium of humanity, hear me. Your sins are confessed, your repentance is sincere. Your penance has been mighty and heartfelt. In the midst of all our darkness, there is light, for he is our beacon in the night. His grace, our strength and our salvation. His mercy, our forgiveness and redemption. His truth, our blessing and our path. Though you have erred, to him you have returned. Igiter obvidius tues te abluo, in nomine imperatoris et imperio ipsius. Therefore I wash you from your vices, in the name of the Emperor and his command. I exhaled slowly as I scanned the gathering in front of the pyre. The gathered soldiers, the witch hunter, the confessor, and everyone else within earshot were left with their jaws on the floor. What I had just done was beyond unheard of. A rogue traitor, a person so immensely powerful and protected that even contact with Xenos was not enough to taint their name, had just performed the prayer of absolution for the redeemed over the corpses of common guardsmen. Such attention to the common imperial citizen was unthinkable, and yet I had just done it. The confusion slowly turned into what I can best describe as adoring worship, excepting the witch hunter, of course. Turning to him, I spoke in a normal tone of voice. There, Inquisitor. Now I will gladly follow your directions. That wasn't so bad, now was it? I knew I was pushing my luck, belittling him as I did, but I didn't care. I had done a good thing this day. I had shown my troops that I did not see them as expendable tools to be used and thrown away. I had shown them that I cared enough about their lives to feel concerned for their souls. And I had shown the same to the retinue of the witch hunter, something they would be murmuring about for a long time, provided their master was not within earshot, of course. Follow me. His voice was a mix between resignation and fury, the kind of voice you expect to hear from an executioner, which, when I thought about it, was not far from the truth. Witch hunters were notorious, even among inquisitors, for being zealous beyond reason, bordering on fanatic. His pace was quick, and his direction was obvious as he headed toward the shack with the pandemic staff inside. I braced myself mentally for the coming interrogation, but he stopped in his tracks as soon as it was within view. Abhumans. He spat out the word with such hatred and vitriol that it shook me out of my musings, and I followed his gaze to my ogrins. Sanctioned ogrins assigned to my personal retinue. Attacking them is the same as an attack on me, Inquisitor. Need I remind you of the consequences of such an action without proper cause? I countered, and a vein popped out on his forehead. Even if I had not been able to see the look on his face, the sheer hatred and anger that emanated from him was more than enough to give me a solid clue as to how he felt about the situation. So, he was a Puritan, opting to kill all abhumans on sight, preferring the safe approach of just in case. Do not consider yourself redeemed as of yet, Lord Captain, as I still have many questions that require answering before I cast my judgment upon you. Your little stunt a moment ago will not be enough to persuade me of your innocence. He waved his hand dismissively, but I pressed on. If you truly believe me to work against the best interest of the Imperium, we would not be having this conversation. At best, you have suspicions, but nothing tangible enough to justify executing an agent of the throne, much less a rogue traitor. My title may not be hereditary, but that only speaks in my favor, as I was given this great honor to spread the imperial truth to the unenlightened fringes of our growing empire, rather than inherit it. So, I propose I take you to the dark artifact, after which you and I will go to my tent, your retinue included, of course, Share a glass of Amasek, and I will answer any and all questions you have, truthfully and without hesitation. I gestured toward the shack with the ogrins and psychers surrounding it, guarded by what looked to be Mordian iron guards. No doubt from the Inquisitor's ship. He said nothing. He just nodded and waited for me to lead the way. Prudent, as it would deprive me of any opportunity to put a shot in his back. Not that I planned to, but it showed why he was a successful witch hunter. He didn't leave things to chance. I sighed slightly, put on a carefree attitude, and started walking ahead of him at a brisk pace. Chapter 40. Just when you think you are safe. We quickly reached the hastily built shack, the psyker around it kneeling and exerting their will on the malignant energies exuded by the pandemic staff. So far they had been successful, but I could sense the mental toll it subjected them to. Sickly green energies swirled around inside the shack, but were restricted to the inside of the little building. By the Holy Throne, the witch hunter muttered under his breath. Indeed, as you can tell, I have used every precaution available to me, even going so far as to move sanctioned psychers from my own ship down here to suppress the unholy energies released by the foul artifact. My ogrins serve as their guardians while they work, and the rest of the troops are under strict orders to keep their distance, under penalty of receiving the Emperor's peace. I explained as the psychers from the witch hunter's retinue rushed forward to aid and replace the exhausted men and women under my command. As they slowly let themselves be replaced, soldiers that had been waiting moved forward, offering food and drink to the drained psychers. They ate and drank with almost mechanical movements before shuffling away to find a bunk to collapse on. I will never forget the nearly endless exhaustion in their eyes, and I could not imagine the toll this had taken on them. I assume you have taken precautions that will allow it to be moved without directly touching it. The witch hunter half sneered. It was obvious he was annoyed by the efficiency I was putting on display. Not surprisingly, his job was to find heresy, even where there was none to find. A weird mix of expectation and projection. Of course, it is secured within an iron box so direct touch can be avoided. The troops that placed it there, unfortunately, passed away from disease and were subsequently cleansed in holy fire to prevent it from spreading. May they find peace in the embrace of the Emperor. I bowed my head at the end of my statement, both as a sign of respect and to hide the smirk that was forming on my face. I had anticipated and answered his next question before he could get to it, and he positively glowed with annoyance. I had to step carefully, despite the fun I was having. For a moment, he was silent before he turned his attention elsewhere. Urab humans. I assume they are both sanctified and loyal, but what about their propensity for corruption? Spending extended time in the presence of such a dark artifact has corrupted more robust and pure minds before. Come now, witch hunter. We both know that Ogrins considers anyone not loving the Emperor with all their heart to be worse than the filthiest heretic. To even suggest they are corrupted is an insult to your intelligence. I was tethering on the brink of what was acceptable to say, but if he was allowed to take my Ogrins in for questioning, he would set a precedent that none were safe from his gaze, not even those that enjoyed the security of being close to me. And to be honest with myself, I took no small amount of pleasure in denying him. I would happily let him take the artifact, even let him help me kill off the Skaven, but it would have to be on my terms. Yes, he was technically a higher rank within the Inquisition, but I was a sanctioned rogue trader with the blessing of the Inquisition. There would be hell to pay if he made my life too difficult. The Inquisition did not like conflict within their own ranks, especially not between powerful agents, and if he went after me, he needed solid proof of heretical actions and thoughts, proof that was so solid that even the most skeptical paper pusher could not deny it. And he barely had ground to be suspicious. I shall have the foul thing moved to my ship as soon as it is deemed safe. In the meantime, that glass of Amasek sounds like just what we need, Lord Captain. The witch hunter's words were courteous enough, but the meaning was unmistakable. He was hungry for answers, and I was but a tasty morsel to him right now. But I had made the offer myself. Of course. If you will follow me, my tent is over this way. I gestured vaguely in the direction of my tent and began walking with a purpose. I heard him snap his fingers, and the sound of several sets of footsteps started following me. It didn't take a genius to figure out that he had decided to bring some of the Mordians with him, Their expertise in urban and close-quarter fighting made them the perfect choice of retinue to bring with him. It only took a minute to get there, and I opened the flap with a gesture for the witch hunter and his retinue to enter. As he walked into my tent, he cast a sharp look around the inside. Pragmatic. How unlike a rogue trader. The remark was meant to antagonize me with my lacking displays of wealth, but I cared little for such things. Pragmatic leaves room for efficiency. I have no use for baubles or gaudy displays, and I believe there is an old saying that simplicity is its own beauty. I agree with that saying. I walked in behind him and picked up 2 glasses and a bottle of Amasec, poured a quarter glass for each of us, and held it out for him. As he reached for it, I pulled it back and looked him in the eyes. It occurs to me that I have not yet been given the honor of your name. I cannot share a drink with a man I do not know the name of. With a raised eyebrow and a smile on my face, I watched his confusion turn to anger, then understanding. You are a bold one, Lord Captain. Hanrostias is my name, he said, and I smiled as I extended the glass once more. Good. Come, Hanrostias, drink with me and ask your questions. I will provide you with the truth in return. He took the glass and sipped it tentatively. A decent vintage, but a far cry from what I expected to find among the private reserves of a rogue trader, he remarked, but he continued to drink it nonetheless. It is the same vintage my soldiers drink. I like to be reminded of my origins. I gave a sardonic smile at the memory. It may not have been enjoyable in the PDF, but I was spared the responsibility of, well, responsibility. Not only generous with your attention, but with rations as well. No wonder the troops under your command hold you in such high regard. There was a mocking tone to Han's words, but also a hint of something else. Maybe respect, but more likely, simple understanding. Having the goodwill of your troops meant devoted people, rather than subjugated people. So, Lord Captain, Han swirled the Amasec in his glass as he took a seat in one of the wooden chairs that had been placed in my tent for guests, while I got comfortable in a cushioned and leather-bound chair. How did you come to find this enemy? Markings were discovered on the space station above, and combined with rumors of mutants haunting the nights in the villages surrounding the mountain, it was the obvious choice to start looking. A short expedition proved I was right, and the extermination process was initiated. It was enough truth to hopefully satisfy the witch hunter, and it left out some crucial details about my more than basic knowledge of the Skaven. I see. And how did you know how to approach this enemy? Han fixated his eyes upon me, and I had to fight hard not to squirm under his scrutiny. I didn't, but I figured that possibly sealing the enemy inside and coming at them with a clear advantage would be prudent and, by the grace of the Emperor, effective. As it turns out, I was right, and the population of the planet remains blissfully unaware of the enemy that lives in the mountain. Speaking off, I managed to capture one of the wretched things for the Ordo Xenos to study, so we may know how best to eradicate their filth. I snapped my fingers, and one of my attendants stuck his head inside, much to the dismay of the Mordian who had taken up guard positions just inside the tent. You summoned me, Lord Captain. What do you require? He asked in a courteous voice, earning a notch of respect from me. Not everyone could remain calm at the sight of an Inquisition interrogation being conducted, civilized as it may be. The air inside was thick with a tense atmosphere like a spring being coiled up too tight. Fetch the captured enemy, and have it brought inside for the Inquisitor. He will be taking it, I said, and received a short nod before the head disappeared. I should be so bold as to hope you have not kept it in the vicinity of your troops, Lord Captain. Han's voice was dry and dangerously low, and I had to flash him a smile as I pulled my eyes away from the Mordians guarding the entrance. Of course. It has been locked away in a hole in the ground, caged and kept in the dark. Han grumbled at this. How did you capture this enemy? Any battle leaves wounded, ripe for the taking. Many of these seemingly lesser ones are quite cowardly and hide among the dead rather than fight. Another grumble escaped Han when I answered, but nothing tangible. We continued to sip our respective glasses in silence as we waited, Han sitting rigid and stiff on the wooden chair, and I leaned back in a relaxed posture. In a sense, it was a picture-perfect image of the roles we represented. He, serving multiple lifetimes as an interrogator and executioner, the perfect agent of the throne, and me, a scandalous rogue, breaking rules and bringing prosperity to the Imperium. After a minute or two had passed, Han moved to say something but was interrupted by a fearful squeak as the tent flap was tossed aside and a steel cage was carried inside. The Skaven slave inside screeching in fear at the sight of the witch hunter. I wasn't surprised, as even among men, he looked unusually grim and calculating. I could only imagine what he looked like to the Rakin, and what came to mind was not good. Han slowly rose from his seat and walked toward the Skaven, who in turn screeched louder and louder. "Silence!" he boomed, and the Skaven slave pressed himself into a corner of the cage, trying to make himself as small as possible. Fascinating. And I believe I saw different varieties out on the battlefield. The question was directed at me, differently equipped and built for all we can see. I know little of such things, but they all die the same at our blades. I responded, and for the first time, there was a sign of something other than scorn on the face of Han. He turned to me and nodded. "A good answer, Lord Captain, and one I would expect of a rogue trader, blessed by the influence of the Inquisition. I do believe I may have been hasty in my abject dismissal of your efforts on this planet. I still have many questions, and you will still be held responsible for every single word of your answers. But know this, I will be more honest in my approach, and there will be no more animosity between us. As you so wisely said earlier, we both work for the same masters. You have earned that much, at least." Han sat down again in a more relaxed manner and held his glass out for me to pour him some more Amasec, and I could only do so in stunned silence. I would still have to weigh my answers carefully and take the greatest care to not let slip that I had intimate knowledge of much more than I should possess, even if I had been in my current position for 100 years. We talked for many hours, Han cleverly hiding meaning where none was intended, and purpose where there were random choices, where he attacked and I defended in a dance of death with my life on the line. By the end, only that single bottle had been shared between us, but he seemed placated and, not satisfied, but as close to that as a witch hunter could get as he left my tent with a simple "Good night, Lord Captain." As his guards left with him, my attendants peeked inside, both to see what state I was in and if I needed anything. But I waved them off. I was ruined mentally. A casual conversation with a witch hunter would always be adrenaline-inducing. So many pitfalls and traps within convoluted words that could alert him to the fact that I was not the imperial citizen they thought I was. I hoped he left soon enough, but I also really wanted to use some of his troops to shield my own, perhaps even entice them enough that I could get a hold of some of them. I quickly went to bed, relieved and exhausted, and slept soundly. The following morning, I was barely through my first cup of recaf, finishing the third report on the seizure of the local nobles' holdings, a summary of actions taken by my confessors let loose upon the populace, and the latest from the front lines when there was a commotion in front of my tent with several raised voices. I allowed myself a smirk as I had taken the liberty of upgrading my security as the very first thing when I woke up, and now anyone wishing to see me would have to cross several groups of guards, each demanding an explanation with orders to turn anyone away that does not seek a meeting on my terms, but is demanding to see me at leisure. This would undoubtedly piss off Inquisitor Han, since a direct order from me could not be surpassed. It was a small act of defiance, and would let him know that while I was willing to work with him, I was adamant about maintaining autonomy in what I did. Still carrying the recaf, I got up and leaned out of my tent. "Let the honored Inquisitor approach," I said to the guards just outside, and the lieutenant in charge of the guards hurried to intercept the brewing incident. Han did not look pleased when he stomped up to my tent, and I sent him as dazzling a smile as I could manage. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the guards shy an inch away from me as I did, the youngest even wincing when I smiled. I would have to look into that later. Han was still looking mighty annoyed, but he was no longer stomping towards me, having slowed to a brisk walking pace. "Rogue Trader Bjorn, why have you not informed me that the situation is as dire as it is?" he boomed in my direction, and for a moment I was taken aback by his tone and harsh demeanor. But I was not about to let him intimidate me. I raised myself to my full height and squared my shoulders. "Dire?" I asked. "The mountain is sealed except for the opening at our back. I have Auspex crews on constant patrol to find attempts at digging around our defenses. Sentries are placed evenly and well within earshot of one another, and we have been gathering strength and waiting for reinforcements before we made the final push. And now that you have arrived with a ship laden with strong, capable fighting men and women, we have that strength. Shouldn't I be the one asking you why I have not been reinforced and supplied to the point of being able to finish this minor skirmish with the archenemy? I barked back. Han looked like he was about to explode, but there was merit to my words. Furthermore, I continued while Han struggled to find words. I know you have verified everything I have told you we have accomplished, as well as passed your impromptu interrogation yesterday evening. I understand that your work is for the betterment of the Imperium as a whole, but to be honest, you are starting to piss me off, Inquisitor. So either give me the troops and weapons I need to finish eradicating this foul nest of mutation and heresy, or get the frack back on your ship and ever so kindly step out of my way while I do what you refuse to. I have offered honesty and even extended the hand of friendship, but you have slapped it away like an impudent servant. Your actions deem you fixated on sowing discourse within our organization's ranks, and I will be sending an extensive report of your actions here to my benefactors. Now, what will you do, Witch Hunter? I loaded as much spite and poison into the pronunciation of his title as I was able to, and he didn't hesitate to reach for his meltagun as I practically spat the last word at him. The sound of nearly 3 dozen lost guns being slammed into the shoulders of the guards around us stopped him before he reached his weapon. We stood there, frozen in the moment, and I decided to roll with my momentum. Let's start this over, Han. What is the issue? I asked more calmly. I was handing him the smallest of straws to escape the situation, but I was not sure he would take it. He slowly righted himself, making a show of removing his hand from his weapon. The artifact you recovered is so much more than you reported. The power of it suggests it was gifted from the dark gods themselves. There is open heretical insurgency on the planet. He hissed low enough for only me to hear. I raised an eyebrow in open question of his words. You already knew this, no? Are you telling me that the artifact we discovered is more than a mere trinket created by a sycophant of the ruinous powers? I asked, feigning ignorance of the severity of the pandemic staff. I knew it would cause havoc wherever it was, unless its bleeding effect of psychic energy was kept in check, causing rampant mutations, disease, and more. Of course it is, since I doubt you would summon an Inquisitor to deal with it. Han spat back, and I kicked myself mentally. Unless I am a fairly newly appointed rogue trader who wishes to be seen as the true son of the Emperor that he is, leaving nothing to chance. Not even the accusation of negligence in the presence of artifacts of the archenemy. Had I left it, we would be having this discussion in a few years. Only then you would be hounding me about why I did not secure it. So tell me, Han, what exactly? I never got to finish the sentence as a messenger came running up to me, his permission orders waving in his hand as he did. Lord Captain, he interrupted, gasping for breath as he presented the Aquila. The enemy is pushing through our defenses. They have already reached the 3rd blockhouse. The honored Chartist Captain's arch-militant is leading a tactical retreat to the cave opening where he hopes to mount a defense to stop the advance. He reported between gasps of air, and I waved him off when he had said what he needed to say. To arms! The enemy approaches. I yelled as loudly as I could. For a few seconds, nothing happened, and then the cavern became a flurry of activity as my orders were spread and soldiers ran to get their kits and weapons. Turning back to Han, I couldn't help but smile. Looks like your thoughts of heresy must wait until I have killed the enemies of the Imperium. With a wink and a laugh, I retrieved my weapons from my tent, forgoing my carapace armor for my greatcoat. I had an idea that might just finally shut up the witch hunter for good. Chapter 41. I was supposed to find a way home. As I left my tent, my blue greatcoat billowed behind me. As I walked, Trock and his remaining Ogren compatriot lumbered up to me, eager to receive orders. Follow me and stay close, I said with a small smile at their eagerness to join combat. Ogrens may not have a lot of intelligence, but their loyalty was unquestionable and their hatred for the enemies of humanity would see them dead before dishonored. I moved to a halfway point between the cavern entrance at our backs and the tunnel leading further into the mountain where I took a stance, Lost pistol in one hand and my falchion in the other. Guardsmen, form a firing line. Wall to wall, I want to see last guns pointed at the tunnel. Heavy bolters on the flanks, brawlers in the 3rd line. My orders were repeated across the cavern and the firing lines started forming. Within 10 minutes, the cavern was covered end to end with guardsmen pointing their lasguns toward the tunnel opening. The heavy bolters on the far flanks had endless boxes of ammunition delivered, and the brawlers, those among the guardsmen that had either the size and bulk to excel in melee, or those nimble individuals with pure skill, had taken their place in the third row, ready to rush forward and engage in melee if the Skaven made it through the hailstorm of ranged firepower I was setting up for them. Trock! I yelled out, and the Ogren came trudging up to me. You and your Ogrins do not leave my side during this battle unless I order you to. He nodded at my words, and they fell into place behind me. Already guardsmen were slowly filing out of the tunnel leading into the mountain, splitting off to the sides as soon as the cavern walls allowed them to, and they hurried to take their place in the ranks of soldiers at my back, eager to reach the safety of mass numbers. Explosions, shouting, heavy gunfire, and bestial roaring could be heard from the tunnel, and I guessed we only had a few minutes to get ready before our last strong point had fallen. One of my aides came up to me, and I turned my head to receive his message. The Inquisitor had ordered me to inform you that he will be marching a full regiment of Mordian Iron guards to the front line as soon as they can leave his ships. In the meantime, he will join you at the front as soon as his personal armor and weapons have been brought to him. He has also ordered mine launchers to be brought to the front, he said, and I detected a hint of fear in his voice. Thank you. Bring me a Master Vox and then make yourself scarce. I would hate to lose a competent aide to an overzealous mutant, I replied, and he made the Aqualia before hurrying over to a group of officers where he gestured wildly and pointed at me to give his words power. The look of annoyance on their faces was replaced with resignation as he had them help carry the Voxcaster over to my position. There seemed to be no apparent reason for my orders, but what could they know of my plans? I had to do something to get the witch hunter to back off, and I knew just how to do it. I grabbed the Voxcaster as he left for safety behind our firing lines. Heavy weapon squads, your orders are to focus on the larger mutants and abominations, especially mutant psychers. Leave the fodder to the regular troops. Mine launchers will arrive soon, and I want them aimed at the tunnel entrance. It does not matter if the enemy is already occupying the area when they arrive. I want that entrance saturated with frac mines. To all units, we are entering the primary battle for the mountain, and the enemy is throwing everything they have at us. Steel yourselves and pray in earnest with me, that we may face the enemies of humanity with fire in our hearts and hatred in our minds. I offer my life to the Emperor. I pray that he accepts it. I offer my strength to the Emperor. I pray that he redresses it. I offer my blood to the Emperor. I pray that it quenches his thirst. I offer my body on the altar of the battlefield. I pray he grants me a noble death. I pray for his protection, as I offer all that I am. Within the first few words of my pray, I could hear the guardsmen across the cavern raise their voices to recite the warrior's prayer of battle. I could not see our dear Inquisitor, but had no doubt he could hear the praying, no matter where he was. Let's see him proclaim me having heretical tendencies now. As the prayer ended, an eerie silence fell over the cavern. All of us watched the tunnel and the sporadic groups of guardsmen that filed out at speed, running as if demons were chasing them, and all of us were thinking the same. Let them come and face the volley of thousands of lasguns at once. Let them taste the Emperor's fury channeled through the men and women fighting in his name, and let them fall before us. After a few minutes passed, our silent waiting was shattered by an ear-shattering roar, followed by hundreds of voices all chanting in unison from within the tunnel. By verse of 8 and chorus of 4, with a choir of bone and chords of pain, I am the celebrant of ruin. By path of 8 and praise of 4, I bow to excess and blood, to change and to plague. With sight of 8, by command of 4, I am weaver and reaper, the shaper of souls and their devourer. I lead the congregation of slaughter. I bring the revelation of skulls. My path is deluge, my wake is holocaust, and my march is fealty. I am the servant. I am the priest. I am the undivided. I could see the unease spreading among the ranks of guardsmen, and I had to do something. Activating the Vox once more, I spoke with a stern and jovial voice. Rejoice, for we are blessed by the Emperor on this day. Not only do we get to rid this planet of mutant filth, but heretics as well. Through the destruction of our enemies do we earn our salvation. As I finished the well-known quote, a roar as impressive as any the Skaven and heretics could muster rose from our ranks as the troops were filled with grim determination. The last of our own out of the tunnel was Idris's arch-militant, walking backward as he fired controlled salvos of lasgun fire into the darkness, every shot granting a moment of illumination of a horde of heretics, both armored and unarmored. The moment he was able to, the arch-militant dashed to the side, opening up for the rest of us to start firing. And open fire, we did. I gave the order through the Mastervox. Fire! As lasguns lit up the semi-permanent darkness and superheated the air, the smell of ozone quickly became overpowering, drowning out the smell of sweat and fear. The screams of the dead and dying chaos worshippers began ringing through the air. Bestial and unnatural roars could be heard further back, but my heavy weapon squads were not yet firing. Good, they adhered to my orders, waiting for the moment when their firepower was needed. The heretics were still pushing forward despite the wall of death blocking the tunnel. Their numbers and blood-crazed charge were enough to force the sheer numbers forward. Some of them used the corpses of their comrades as improvised shielding against the onslaught, and it did buy them precious seconds of movement whenever they did. They soon hit the tunnel opening, spreading out like marbles rolling across the floor, giving the rest of my firing line targets of opportunity as hundreds more lasguns opened fire and lit up crevices that had never seen something as bright. I was firing my las pistol as fast as I could and got the occasional blip in the corner of my eye, but that was not my reason for going for the middle of the line. I wanted to prove by action, beyond any doubt, that our dear witch hunter was wrong in his badly hidden animosity against my person, and that any further continuation of such would only work against his already horrendous reputation, considering his affiliation with the Inquisition, and a rogue traitor. Leading the defense against heretics and mutants working together was about as true a behavior a man could display in service to the Emperor. Going against me after this could see him risk open rebellion. I already had a more than adequate reputation among my fighting men and women for them to choose me over the fear of an inquisitor. If he moved on me after this, he wouldn't make it to the designated execution spot before he would be ripped to shreds by the men among us. The larger aberrations of the Skaven came pushing out of the tunnel, bulldozing chunks of our fortifications in front of them. This makeshift barrier vastly increased the flow of giant rats, Skaven slaves, aberrations, and other hideously mutated things, and they died in greater numbers as a result. The heavy bolters were barking now, their larger bolts ripping through the horde at an astonishing speed. Even as better-equipped Skaven, the clan rats, entered the line of fire, it did little to stop them. We simply had too much firepower concentrated on a single point of entry. But, as with all good things, Soda had our advantage. The ground started rumbling, and about 20 meters in front of me the ground exploded upwards, and a giant balding creature with front claws the size and thickness of a regular Skaven came flying towards us. It was only the combined fire that made the burrowing behemoth curl up to protect its face rather than succeed in its impact upon us. As things were, it landed a few meters in front of us and spun in place, causing its tail to impact my firing line. I was pushed aside as bodies were moved with bone-shattering force, and the brawlers didn't wait for my order, but charged forward with claymores, axes, and falchions. They descended upon the beast like a swarm of ants, attacking a larger and stronger, but ultimately inferior insect specimen. While our part of the line got back in order, Trock had pulled me to my feet and moved close enough that I could smell him, but at least he gave me just a bit of breathing room from the other soldiers, not wanting to get in the way of a protective Ogren. The burrowing behemoth fell under the combined efforts of the brawlers and the rest of the line, and they started cheering, but I caught the eye of one of the sergeants and signaled for them to retreat immediately. The Skaven would not let such a tunnel, so close to us, go unused, and I was not about to lose my best melee fighters just because they got excited over killing a giant mutant. Besides that, my battlefield savant ability was screaming to me that trouble was incoming. Thank the Emperor, I was not in a position to be questioned about my tactical decisions. My instincts proved right as moments after the brawlers pulled back to our own lines, the heretical followers of the Skaven came screaming out of the hole in the ground, shouting madly and swinging their weapons at anyone that got too close, including each other. It wouldn't be long before they reached our lines, even with the ranged weapon advantage we had. I had to do something. This could throw everything down the drain since every soldier on my side that got entangled in the melee was one lost gun less to fire at the enemy, which in turn would see more enemies reach the lines in a vicious cycle that could quickly turn this battle into a crushing defeat. I was so insanely outnumbered that even starting this war has been bordering on suicide. But in for a penny, in for a pound, and I had to do something, anything. I grabbed the Master Vox. I need breachers to my location. Bring Melta charges. I ordered and hung it back up before I could get a reply. Trock. I screamed as I looked around for the lumbering giant. A giant hand landed on my shoulder, and I looked to my right to find him staring down at me. We need to reach the tunnel so we can collapse it. When I say so, get me to the hole in the ground. I ordered him, and I saw him ponder my words for a second before nodding with resolution and hefting the improvised slab shield, made from a handful of small tree trunks, that was on his back. As soon as he did that, I readied my blade, switching it to my dominant right hand. Fix bayonets. Get ready to charge. I yelled as loud as I could, and many soldiers around me fixed their bayonets between shots with experienced ease, barely breaking stride in their controlled bursts. Somewhere behind me, I heard orders being yelled, and moments before I gave my order to charge, a series of thump noises. The mine launchers had arrived. I waited a few seconds for the first explosions to do their magic, but I was surprised at the low intensity of the explosions. It didn't lessen the amount of screaming, though. It rather seemed to enhance it, and I realized that there was fear mixed in with the pain and dying. Pure, genuine, unfiltered fear. The Iron Guard must have used shredder mines to turn swathes of the battlefield into bloody pulp. As insidious and morally questionable as it was, I had to respect the effectiveness of such a tactic. Those who did not die would be maimed beyond fixing by whatever primitive mud paste that passed for medicine on a medieval world. A few moments passed before I heard a voice from my left. You summoned us, Lord Captain. I saw a group of rough-looking guardsmen, more so than the standard grizzled individuals you might find in the guard. I looked them over, and they presented themselves with the Aquila for a moment before hefting lost guns and adding fire to the ranks of soldiers while waiting for instructions. Yes, I said to the squad leader. I need you to close the tunnel ahead of us. I do not care how, as long as your fellow guardsmen do not suffer in the ensuing explosion. Follow behind me when the line starts moving. I ordered him, and he smiled widely. It's not often we are afforded a place behind the front. That will make it an easy and fast task, Lord Captain. He grinned as he acknowledged my order and turned to instruct his squad. I gave him a few seconds to convey the message and then turned my attention back to the task at hand and the rather impatient ogryn standing in front of me. Now, Trock, I said while giving him a push in the back. With a shout of glee, he threw himself forward. His bulk and unexpected momentum it brought with it saw two heretics turn to red paste on the massive steel club he wielded in his right hand. Death to the heretics! I cried out as I raised my falchion as high as I could and made a slashing motion forward, settling into a fast jog to keep up with Trock, who was busying himself with pulping any of the chaos worshippers that crossed his path on the way to the tunnel in the ground. The collective roar of the soldiers around me as they joined in the charge made the Chaos Heretics pick up speed in return, eager to join in the melee. With a handful of steps, the line crashed into the charging heretics. The heretics had the advantage of psychotic rage and a fearlessness that only came from fanatical zealotry. My ranks had the advantage of being able to work together and enjoying cover fire from ranged weaponry. The spread-out formation of the heretics also helped my troops overpower them before they could group up. Trock, for his part, was moving with the singular purpose of reaching the tunnel, and the path he had taken was already littered with the broken corpses of those who had tried to stop him. The breacher team was close behind me, and as soon as we got close enough, 4 of the novice endurants set up their heavy shields and trained their specialized shotgun toward the tunnel, ready to lay down devastating amounts of fire on anyone that got too close. Their sergeant took up position in front of them, his chainsword growling as the engine inside of it was idling. The squad surveyor knelt behind the endurance and started furiously operating the electronic device in his hands. I was not close enough to see what exactly he was using, but I had a good idea. 3 servo skulls with a rather large and unsightly metal ball fitted where the lower jaw should be, rose above the ranks of my firing lines behind me and started floating toward the hole in the ground. Geist skulls on the move, the surveyor called out, and the rest of the breacher team took up position around him while the regular troops that had followed us made themselves busy with trying to set up a supporting firing line that could free up those caught in melee combat. The service skulls modified with explosive charges floated hastily toward the hole from which the heretics continued to pour forth, now with more Skaven slaves in tow. If the damnable rats had redirected some of their forces to that tunnel, it was a matter of moments before more exotic variants or mutants spilled forth. One of the Geist skulls was knocked down by a heretic who got lucky with a wild swing, but the other 2 floated on and disappeared into the hole. Seconds later, a gout of flame erupted from the ground, and the sound of an explosion followed by a collapsing tunnel reached us. We didn't have time to celebrate. Back to the line, I cried out, and the Endurance started backing up while still training their shotguns forward and keeping their shields in place. They were firing fast but still with precision, as the time we had spent dealing with this attempt at circumventing our firing lines had cost us precious ground that the rest of the original firing line could not keep secure, and the Skaven clan rats were getting precariously close, with only 100 or so meters separated the charging horde from our lines. A clanking whirring of metal cut through the sounds of battle and screams of death, and green warpstone bullets started hammering into the shields of the Endurance and the soldiers around us. I followed the trajectory of the sudden burst of gunfire from our enemy, and my heart sank. There, waddling out of the tunnel with a weapon that was already firing, came a storm fiend followed by 2 augmented rat ogres sporting warpfire throwers and massive pincers made out of rusted metal. The packmaster that was fused to the back of the storm fiend, acting as an auxiliary brain to help it understand tactics and complex orders, was directing the fire of the 3 rattling cannons grafted onto the beast, and with 8 barrels each, it was laying down devastating amounts of firepower and destruction, especially against firing lines like the one I had made my soldiers get into. The augmented rat ogres stuck near it, no doubt intended to take over should anything happen to the storm fiend. Not that it was likely to happen. The green arching lighting that wreathed the storm fiend in a protective field made it impossible for anyone to engage in close combat with it. For a short second, I pondered the enormous cost to the Skaven warlord that had secured such a beast, but I could not linger at that thought. Shoot the little one on the back. I cried out to no one in particular as I started firing my lost pistol with impunity, desperately hoping that one of the shots would connect. If we could take out the packmaster that was fused to it, the natural aggression of the storm fiend would make it turn on the 2 augmented rat ogres out of instinct. They were extremely territorial and extremely violent by nature, and it was our only chance of getting rid of the beast without committing enormous amounts of lives to the task. I could see the tracers from one of the heavy bolters shift its aim and start peppering the beast, several of the bolts impacting near Packmaster, but not a direct hit. The storm fiend roared, a sound that made the cave vibrate with its echo, and started turning to return the favor of firepower, but the troops close to me added their lost guns to the mix, and one of them scored a lucky hit, nailing the Packmaster in the head and taking off most of it in the process. An anguished cry came from the storm fiend, and it shook its head in confusion before its eyes settled on one of the augmented rat ogres, and it turned its weapons on its comrade. The hailstorm of warpstone bullets was enough to bring down the foe, but the other rat ogre now got involved, firing warp fire into the face of the storm fiend while it tried to get a hold of it with its pincer. They would destroy each other quickly enough. The sight of their champions of war being bested before they could even start doing proper damage was more than even the storm vermin that had started showing up in the tunnel could handle. A horrendous stench spread in the massive cave as thousands upon thousands of Skaven started excreting the musk of fear, and panic set in among their ranks. In another few minutes, they would be routed and we could start the cleanup process. This attack was an all-or-nothing affair for the Grey Seer that had ordered it, and if this failed now, he would lose the support of every Skaven under the mountain, as well as whatever other leaders that was still alive. No. Man-Thing must die. Do not flee or suffer the anger wrath of the great horned rat's chosen seer. Out of the tunnel came the largest rat ogre I had ever seen, more than twice as big as the regular ones, and with a hunched back caused by the truly obscene amount of muscle mass on the gigantic creature. On the back a platform had been mounted, and on said platform stood the gray seer that had cursed my existence after we ruined his screaming bell contraption and killed at least one of the rat ogre handlers on it. The gray seer I had gravely insulted in his own language as I was being carried away. His beady eyes were scanning the carnage in front of him, the destroyed hole in the ground, and the firing lines that were killing his Skaven troops by the hundred every second. Then he saw me. You, defiler of the sacred bell, enemy of the horned rat, you will suffer as the mighty strong Skaven take their revenge on you. Die, 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 die. The ranting gray seer was practically frothing at his mouth as he lifted his hand, and I saw green forked lightning shoot straight toward me. I had no place to move, no room to dodge. Being pressed in between the soldiers around me, I was staring at his warp attack as it snaked through the air at incredible speeds, and only one thought stuck in my head. I was supposed to find a way home. Chapter 42. True Son of the Imperium. The world slowed down as the green lightning approached me. Lost gun beams became visible as solid beams of light. Bolt rounds almost hung in the air, and droplets of blood from wounds stood out as glittering red jewels suspended in time. This was it. This is when I died, stuck underground on a backwater shithole of a planet on the fringes of known imperial space. Then came the impact, but the lightning never reached me. It stopped inches from me and wreathed around a shimmering dome that enveloped me. Not today, abomination. The Emperor's anointed are not yours to defile. I looked behind me and saw Han, that amazing individual, flanked by several of the psychers that had helped him secure the pandemic staff. Their eyes were blazing with warp energies, and it became obvious they were the cause of the telekine dome around me. I shall see you ground to dust before the might of mankind. Now fulfill your destiny and die at my hands, mutant. He roared and raised his own weapon. A gun I had only read about back in my own world. A Purgatus crossbow, the combination of a bolt gun and stake crossbow. He fired a single stake toward the gray seer, and I saw a flash of silver before it grazed the leg of the Skaven psyker. For a moment, I stared in anticipation of the supposed effect of the silver-tipped stakes fired from the weapon, and I was not disappointed. Warp energy began rapidly exuding from the gray seer, quickly running out of his control, and I sensed panic in the Skaven warlock. As a desperate measure, an enormous warpstone token suddenly appeared in the hand of the Skaven, and it began chewing ferociously, probably in an attempt to magnify its own power over the immaterium in an effort to control the psychic energy now running wild and rampant through the gray seer's body. His beady eyes became imbued with the sickly green warp energies as he chewed on the stone, and the out-of-control psychic energy seemed to condense inwards in the psyker. It screeched, a sound of pure rage and frustration as warp lightning shot from all of its fingers with no specific target in mind. His staff crackled with barely contained energies, functioning as a conduit to discharge the worst of the bleeding psychic effect. As the entire battlefield watched in either awe or fear, depending on which faction you looked at, the gray seer slammed his free hand down on the back of the rat ogre bonebreaker he was riding, discharging the runoff of psychic energy into the beast. Now wreathed in the psychic energy that was no longer threatening to kill the gray seer, the bonebreaker howled in fury and started thrashing about in an attempt to shake off the gray seer and get away from the psychic attack it was suffering. Little did it help as the platform on its back provided a stable platform for the gray seer to keep his balance. Large wounds opened and closed in rapid succession on the body of the monstrous mutant creation. Burns spread a sickly stench of burned meat before disappearing again, and the sound of enormous bones cracking again and again with the sound of snapping trees could be heard over the pained and anguished roars of the beast. While the wounds were healing, it was clear that the healing abilities of the monster were being tested to their absolute limits under the assault of enough psychic energy to level a good portion of an entire Imperial regiment. Hundreds of heretics and Skaven were trampled and squished beneath its stomping feet as it threw itself around in increasing desperation to get away from its master and the ungodly pain he was inflicting upon it. But the gray seer had jammed his warpstone staff into the body of the giant rat ogre to anchor himself down, while he discharged the vast amounts of power he could no longer control. I vaguely noticed that the fighting had stopped at the sight of the spectacle. My troops were stunned in silence over the display they were witnessing, and the Skaven were stunned in fear of seeing their master and his ultimate enforcer being brought to the brink of defeat in such a short time. Soon enough, the hulking monster slowed down its efforts to get away as the healing factor could no longer keep up with the damage, and it became sluggish, started stumbling, and finally fell over. Shallowed breathing slowing down while the gray seer finally seemed to get some semblance of control over himself once more. When he lifted his head and stared at us, his eyes had become entirely green and looked like warp stones had replaced them. He was heaving for breath, and despite being covered in fur, you could see the sweat that formed in droplets on his fur from the exertion it took to survive the ordeal. He didn't say anything, but when he opened his mouth, a scream that attacked both our ears and our minds escaped his mouth. The psychers that had brought with him busied themselves with protecting themselves, while troops on both sides fell to their knees while clutching their heads in a futile effort to protect themselves from the psychic shriek. But for some reason, I remained strangely unaffected. Since he was not moving, and no one was moving to fight each other while the gray seer was shrieking, I took an opportunity. Dropping my lost pistol, I drew my stub cannon and aimed. I squeezed the trigger. I saw the bullet impact, but the damage was minimal, barely noticeable beyond a small wound. But it did stop the psychic attack, and for the briefest of moments the green eyes flickered back to their normal red color. But it was enough. The short loss of control sent the warp energies, still rolling around in his body, into overdrive and split his body apart in a massive explosion of energy that knocked everyone in the cavern to the ground and generated a gigantic hole in the ground where, just moments before, the Skaven warlock had been standing. As we slowly got to our feet, a deep shuddering sigh reverberated through the mountain, and the floor and walls started rumbling. I grabbed the Master Vox. The mountain is collapsing. Everyone retreat. Outside this instant. Leave anything you do not have on you already. I barked into the mouthpiece before I dropped it and turned around, grabbing Han's arm as I ran past him and gave a heavy tug that made him start running alongside me. Deep inside the mountain, the faint sound of crashing rocks and horrible screaming could be heard, and I realized that this would bring a swift end to the war, leaving a relatively peaceful and easy cleanup job of securing the rest of the planet. Something I could leave to the Inquisition, who would only be too happy about being given the job. You could say a lot about them, but they loved doing what they did. As we ran through the tunnel to the outside, we yelled at the guard posts we passed to run with us. And while confused, they followed the flow of guardsmen and voidsmen running for the safety of the outdoors. We left weapons, tents, equipment, mutant prisoners, food supplies, and more, but I didn't care. Material goods could be easily replaced, but good and loyal guardsmen could not. We ran like the chaos gods themselves were chasing after us, and soon enough the end of the tunnel came into view, the guardsmen guarding it looking bewildered and frightened at the panicked retreat approaching them. When I burst outside, I realized it was nighttime. The cold air and oppressing darkness greeted us as the rumbling sounds inside the mountain became louder and louder. If I wasn't mistaken, the psychic explosion of the gray seer must have triggered a chain reaction in the hollowed-out mountain, causing collapses and cave-ins, which in turn caused further instability. The entire damn mountain was collapsing in on itself in front of our eyes, and I couldn't help but sigh in relief. This would take care of both the Skaven Undercity and whatever heretical nests were inside. The few scattered survivors would be easy to take care of for the Inquisition. Han, I trust your organization will be more than happy to take over the process of finishing off whatever remains of the mutants and heretics? I huffed as I tried to regain my breath. Even in the body I inhabited, hardened and built for survival on a world of extremes, I was aware of the strain this mad escape had put on me. Han, for his part, was lying flat on his back, gasping desperately to gain enough breath to speak. It took a minute for him to recover himself enough, but when he did, he got to his feet and, to my great surprise, bowed his head to me. It would be my pleasure to facilitate the extermination of anything that escaped this unexpected turn of events. And Bjorn, know this. Your actions here have proven beyond any doubt that you are a true son of the Imperium. I will make a point of this in my report. Your words both before and during the battle show a devotion to the Emperor I rarely see outside the ranks of my own organization. One question still haunts me, though. He looked thoughtful as he looked me in the eyes, not with the content and scorn that you usually saw from witch hunters, but with genuine curiosity. Where did you get the insight about this enemy? Your ship's logs show you have not encountered them before landing here, and your service record states the same. Please, do not see this as a question asked by an inquisitorial representative, but as one faithful Imperial to another. I thought about it for a moment. How much would I like to indulge his curiosity? Did I dare risk offending him after he finally relented in his dogged pursuit to make me look like a traitor? All rogue traitors have their secrets, Han, and I am no different. Would you tell me of the inner workings of your organization if I asked you? I gave him a sincere smile with my words to show I meant no offense, and he smiled back. Very well, keep your secrets. But know that I will call upon you if I ever encounter this enemy in my travels. And I expect you to answer that call. There was an edge to his words, but also resignation. If I am in Imperial space, I will answer. But as you well know, my duties to the throne demand I go outside of sanctioned Imperial space to spread the Imperial truth and extend the borders of the Imperium. If possible, I will ensure ways to receive communications, and should you call, you have my word as a rogue trader that I will answer the call. I was offering him an olive branch, and he took it with a gracious nod. Now, if you will excuse me, Inquisitor, I must attend to the good soldiers of the Imperium. I turned away without waiting for a reply, and Hans sat down in the grass and leaned forward to regain his full composure. I waved a soldier over, and she came running as I did. Send a message to my ship. Triple amasec, ale, low stick, and recaf rations are to be distributed to all soldiers in my employ, both on the ground and on the ship. Double food and energy cell rations for a week to the lower decks. A full day of shore leave for all soldiers when we next make port in a friendly space station. A great victory was won today, and it is only fair that everyone gets to enjoy it. Later, just before festivities are about to begin, I wish to address troops with a speech. Now go, carry out my will. I waved her off, and she saluted with the Aquila before sprinting off with a big grin plastered on her face. Such generosity was practically unheard of, and I could see the disbelief in Han's eyes when I turned back to him. What good is all the wealth in the universe if it is hoarded and hidden away? I said as an answer to the unspoken question, those soldiers won us the battle, and I would be no better than a corrupt governor if I did not acknowledge that. And now, I will retire to my ship. My quarters have remained unused for too long, and I miss the luxury of sleeping in a proper bed. We will speak more soon enough, Inquisitor. Han nodded and made his way over to his Mordians, who immediately fell into disciplined formation behind him. On the shuttle back to the ship, I decided I would take time to dive into the system when I was alone in my quarters before I went to sleep. There would no doubt be a lot for me to take care of when I awoke.